Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. It is good to actually be back in the shop. It has been 3 weeks since we've done a live in here, as my wife and I have been in the UK and having a little bit of fun there.
Oh,
so,
yeah,
a little bit. Just
a little quieter.
Yes, no kids. It's kind of nice there. I like that about UK.
Thanks, Mom.
What? Oh yes, thanks for
Mama and Papa.
The family watching the kids for us. So last week we didn't do a live at all because my wife and I were doing our last day in London and doing it up big. Then 2 weeks ago we did the Q&A from Portsmouth, England. And before that we did whatever our last session was here. I don't even remember, it was so long ago. But tonight we are doing butterflies or Dutchmen or bow ties or whatever you want to call them. There's a whole bunch of different names. But basically they're an old-fashioned way of stabilizing a chunk of wood. And we'll get into that in a little bit. There's a few notes and things that are coming up. I do want to tell everyone, if you like these lives, make sure you subscribe to Wood by Wright 2, because it's going to be soon here that I'm going to be switching the lives over to Wood by Wright 2. Wood by Wright is becoming a YouTube channel, and that means that it is it's going to be a little bit more of what the main videos on Saturday have been. And most of this talking content and things like that are going to go over to Wood by Wright 2 here soon. So stay tuned for that and be sure to follow over there. So if you like the how-to data information, that will mostly be on Wood by Wright 2. And there's our kids talking to us. Other things coming up in June, the 13th.
Thanks, Alan.
What's that?
Alan's trying to get out of the doghouse.
Oh, and I heard the switch light turned on. Sorry, I didn't get that. Oh, Alan, thank you. Yes, yeah, and I should probably read one of Alan's jokes that he put up. Where do trees go to preschool? I forgot. I had to look it up.
Elementary.
Oh, yes, elementary. Thank you.
You need to give me a raise.
Yeah, yes, you do. I'll double it. How's it sound?
Zero.
So upcoming events before those jump off my brain, in June, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, I think it is, we're going to be, I'm going to be down at Midwest Tool Collectors Association, the national meet in Peoria, Illinois. This is the biggest tool sale of the entire year in the entire world, with one spot. And so if you are anywhere nearby or within 10 hours driving time, it is worth driving for. People literally will be flying in from all over the world to come to it. And it's more than that. I will also be doing a talk on Thursday where I will be talking through tools and doing some demonstration, and hopefully be bringing my bench. It'll be fun to lug this out of the basement. So that's going to be interesting. But then also on the 9th of June, so coming up in 2 weeks? 3 weeks, something like that. 9th of June, in the afternoon, there's going to be a meet and greet at DMF Toolworks. So the same guy who makes my card scrapers that I sell, as well as he's just recently released the dowel plate that I had a video come out. He's doing a meetup at his shop in Chicago. So I'm going to be there. I have a link to both of those down in the description below, so if you want to see that, go click those out. So I'll be hanging out there and looking forward to meeting anyone who wants to come by and say hi. I think that's about it. Anything I'm forgetting before we jump in?
No.
And Alan, just so you know, 5 out of 4 people admit they're bad with fractions. Okay, let's get into bow ties. So
you missed this, didn't you? I didn't get away from now.
She's stuck with me.
Is everyone else's feed choppy and glitching?
Yeah, for some reason our internet connection has been a little slow tonight, so the feed might be a little bit glitchy. Hopefully it's not too bad, or it works a little bit better, but such is the fun of live streaming.
Chopping wood, whatever. Sorry.
So bow ties, basically they are a way of stabilizing wood.
Clyde.
And what's that? Oh, Clyde.
Clyde contributed to the film.
Oh, cool, Clyde. Oh, let's do another one for Clyde before I get into this. Did you hear about the guy who invented lifesavers? They say he made a mint.
say they're not
the old ones,
but
the white ones.
The white ones, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You're thinking of the candy ones.
I was. What other lifesavers are there? Come on.
So
The
thank you for
gummy
that.
ones are my favorite, but anyways.
Let's get back to the topic before we jump off of this. Bow ties. They're called bow ties or butterflies or Dutchman, and there's a whole series of other names. And basically, if you have a crack in a board, let me see if I have a board. I should have thought of this ahead of time. If I have a board and there's a crack running down it, over time that crack may want to spread. Now, if the wood is solid and there isn't too much wood movement, and it's not like if it's inside air conditioned, the crack isn't going to move that much. But it is nice to actually connect those two pieces back together and put a tie that pulls them back together. If this is something that's going to be outside, or if it's not in an air-conditioned environment and the wood expands and contracts, over time that crack may actually propagate and spread further. Whereas if you put a Dutchman or a bow tie in there, it'll stop the crack from spreading. Now, one of the problems with it, though, is it is a cross-grain connection. So you are literally putting the grain of the bow tie is running across the grain of your wood. And so if there is any massive expansion and contraction in the wood, the bow tie may create gaps. And so that's why you don't see a lot of huge bow ties. If they're covering a lot of wood, you may actually run into problems with them stretching and spraying things around. What's that?
Brian put his 99 cents in.
I'll get another one here in a little bit. So if you have a really big bow tie, you might run into problems. And so you see a lot of these show bow ties that are really big and they cover a lot of grain. So if I were putting it across a table and if I had like a 2-foot long bow tie, if I'm not in a really well air-conditioned room, the expansion and contraction of the wood will actually create gaps on either end of the bow tie as it expands and contracts, because the bow tie in length will not get longer and shorter. The bow tie stays the same length, whereas the wood it's cutting across will actually expand and contract. If you want to see more of that, I have an entire video on wood movement which describes all that. But basically, all that to being said, that's the reason most bow ties are only like 3 to 4, maybe 5 inches long. Any bigger than that, and you might start running into expansion contraction issues. Small bow ties are incredibly strong. You don't need big bow ties, and a lot of people think you need the neck in them to be really large and expansive to have a large strength, but you don't. Let me actually show you some that I have here in the shop. And I have several. Let me switch this over to.
Is it wrong that I started singing in my head, I like big bow ties and I cannot lie?
Yeah, that's my wife right there.
I'm tired.
So here I actually have a couple bow ties on a vise that I made a while ago. And this neck here is only about a 1/4 inch wide. And I had a lot of people saying, wow, that's really not strong enough. It's going to break that. Well, it's a 1/4 inch wide, but it's 3/4 inch. And the amount of tension on that is, it would take an amazing amount to make that actually break. So you don't have to make these huge. Little ones like this and this are really all you need to create most gaps and secure things down. So don't worry about being too big. I think that's one of the big things that scares a lot of people is my bow tie isn't strong enough to handle it. Well, yes, just about any bow tie, if it's designed well, is strong enough. The next thing we have to talk about.
That's my thing. So you just got to be like Sarah.
Yes, be like Sarah
when you think bow ties. Small but mighty.
The other thing you have to think about bow ties is they don't have to be perfectly shaped. You can make a bow tie any shape you want as long as it's bigger on the ends than in the middle. So you can actually, I've seen a lot of really decorative shapes that are actually shaped like a butterfly or shaped like a dog bone or anything like that. As long as it's fatter on the outside than it is in the middle, that's just the key to stop it from coming out. Basically, you're putting two dovetails back to back, which really draws some weird issues. So let's actually get into making a key on here. So the first thing, I've got this chunk of Paduke here. Let me focus this in and set that up. There we go. And this is Paduke, and this is that that weird Filipino teak, not teak, mahogany that they can sell at the big box store. And I want to actually shape this, and I really don't care what it is. I just want to make sure that it's not too big. So I'm going to make something that's like about this long, so I'm not sticking out too much. So let's cut this to length and make it about that long of a bow tie. And then I'm just going to draw some shape on here. So I'm going to put a point here. I'm going to put a point here, and then I'm going to draw a line out here, and I'm going to draw a line out here, draw a line there, Draw a line there, and I don't care what shape this is because I'm going to cut this, and whatever shape it is, I'm going to put that into here. So now I've got this shaped out. Let's actually cut this apart. And let me flip this over while I'm setting this up. Any questions while I'm setting this up?
No.
No questions? Oh, people have forgotten about questions.
I think we're all out of practice. And all I can tell you is I put way too much honey in this tea.
So I'm going to cut this down. Flip this around so you guys can see. And I've had a lot of questions recently about working in the end vise. And I do a lot in this end vise. I do almost all my work holding in this as opposed to the leg vise. I'm not being particularly careful. I'm just cutting this to rough shape right now. Actually, let me grab my tenon socks that has a rip cut. Get that out of the way. And let's cut this down. Whew. I've got a tooth that's out of shape. There. There's the rough shape of our bow tie.
I have a question when you're ready.
What's that?
Alan wants to know if it's best to use hardwood or softwood.
Generally a hardwood. Like maple is one of my favorites. It's a very stable, smooth wood. And it works fairly well. I do a lot with Padauk because it's a good contrasting wood. But walnut's great. Just about any hardwood is good. Most hardwoods actually have a slightly stronger tensile strength than softwoods. Just like that. Tip this over.
What did Alan do that he needs to dig out of a deep hole?
What's that?
What didn't he do, B-Power? What didn't he do? His personal vendetta against perfection. Because you won't grow when you're let's see.
And now all I want to do on the second cut is I want to cut down and meet that other line. So you can see I'm not even following my lines here. I'm just creating a cut and then shooting for the other spot. So I'm going to set this up and shoot down. Just like that. Do the same thing on this side. Not looking for perfection, just looking for something that's bigger on the ends than it is in the middle. And yes, this is honestly how I make all my butterflies. I don't lie them out. I don't lay them out. I don't mark things to perfection. Surprise, surprise, I just grab a saw and start cutting. Whoop. Took a finger off.
Oh, did you go there, B-Power? Did you really just go there?
Now, the important thing is that the sides on this are square. So I'm going to grab my little square here and put it on the face. And I want to make sure that these are square. I don't want any tapering on there. And I made fairly sure when cutting them that I left them fairly square. I also have some chunk here in the middle I want to clean out. So I'll put that in there, grab a file. And we'll grab this one. Just get rid of any saw marks. Don't need to be too precise, just precise enough. And that's about it for the bow tie. Just like that. And like that. Bow tie is ready to go. Now on this, the one thing I forgot to mention ahead of time, this side is smooth and this side is rough. I need at least one smooth side because I need a side to be able to connect it to the wood. And so this is the wood we're going to put in. We have an imaginary crack running through here. So we're going to take this bow tie and we want the crack to run right through that thin spot. So we can set it on there and go to town. So let's actually work on setting this up. Any questions yet?
Well, Carbonite Gamoran wanted to know if I got rested up for my trip. So I was just saying that I'm starting to adjust, but today I was starting to get a sore throat, so I've been trying to keep it at bay. But that's what I get for playing a silly game on the tablet for like 2.5 hours.
Yep.
Going to bed too late.
I didn't force her to go to bed last night.
Always a bad thing. I'm not grown up enough. Oh, Yes, I just opened myself for a short joke right there. I know.
Now, I like to use double-sided carpet tape here. And there are 1,000 different tricks out there. What's that?
Nothing.
Oh. William Walker, my good friend on the podcast, he likes to actually use masking tape and super glue. And he'll put masking tape on the board, masking tape on the wood, and then super glue the two together. I find that to be just one extra step, and so I just like to use the carpet tape. The only thing you have to be careful with carpet tape is you have to put enough pressure down so that it will stick. And here, let me switch this back over to 2
I have a question when you have a moment.
What's that?
So Cheatwood Creations asked, why does it need to be thinner in the middle than on the outsides?
The reason is we don't want it to pull apart. The whole purpose of the bow tie is to keep the wood from spreading apart. So if it's fatter on the outsides than it is in the middle, then the wood won't be able to pull apart because there's always some material stopping it from sliding farther out. If it's fatter here than it is on the outside, then the wood would be able to slide off. Oops, sorry, my hands are a little high. So it's just, you want to be able to make sure that the board can't slide off. So basically you're doing what a dovetail does. And this is something you can do even without glue. So the glue is just in there to hold it in place. The function and the strength of this is something that holds itself even without glue. So we're going to set this down on here and put a good bit of pressure down on it. Lock it down in. And then I'm going to use a marking knife, come in here and mark it out. Making sure my line is nice and tight. And having this tape in here makes it very easy to mark precisely where the line is. And run along this. What's that?
Our thing noticed some activity. Our
There
front
you
door.
go.
Probably because it's so windy. Yes.
Oh, my notification popped up there. And there we go. And I'm taking my time here because this is one of the most important steps. I want to cut in there. I want to make sure my tip is stuck down on the edge there. I want to get a nice clean line because if my line is off, then what I cut is off and everything else is bad. And then what I like to do is before pulling that up, I'm actually going to pull up the tape on the outside here, which I can't get my finger on right now. And I want to make sure that that peels off all the way around the bow tie. And some people actually like to keep the tape down, keep the outside down, and take the middle off. I like to keep the middle in and then take the outside off. Just different personal preferences. Everyone's got something a little different. And I am a little different. Now, normally, what I would do is I grab...
A bunch of questions coming in. Sorry.
What's that? Oh, questions coming in? What you got? I'll grab this out.
Ooh, okay, so Charles Sullivan asked, how do you know how many you need when stopping a crack? Is there a standard, like one every foot, or just what you feel like making?
It's really a personal preference. If the crack is big, it has more to do with the amount of material on either side of the crack. The more board there is on either side of the crack, the more expansion and contraction you're going to have, and the more force there's going to be on that. In most all uses, one bow tie is all you need. One bow tie, well placed, will solve all your problems. But one bow tie by itself just never looks quite right, and having a string of like 2 or 3 makes everything look better. If you have a long crack that's like 3 or 4 foot long on a tabletop, it's not going to look very good to have one big bow tie. Whereas if you put 3 or 4 in a line and make them all slightly different sizes and shapes, then everything kind of comes together. And so it's more a personal preference than that. There isn't really a rule of thumb because every board is different and every crack is different and every wood that you're using is different and every shape between them is different. And so it's kind of one of those things you just got to feel out. But one bow tie will do an amazing amount. If it's well set and it's deep enough, a single bow tie will hold together a 4-foot table. They don't really need to be that much, as long as the crack isn't running the full length of the table. So normally I'm going to be grabbing a couple bits and I'm going to run them down. And what I'll actually do is put a piece of tape on there at the thickness of my wood, so that I know when I hit the flag, I've gone deep enough. In this case, because this bow tie is so small, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to chop this out and go to town. Any questions, Walt, before I jump into this?
I do. Earl Soldier asked, if I want to use a bow tie, to repair a crack in a large bowl, does it matter how close to the edge of the bowl the bow tie is placed?
Yes. Ooh, thank you. That's a good point here. Actually, switch over to this camera. Now, if the bow tie is here, like say the crack is running from here out to like here, and this bow tie is holding the crack together. If I move this bow tie farther out over here, and there isn't a lot of material here, so if this bow tie were like here, then the problem is there isn't a lot of material here, and you could actually just break this piece off, and it would just snap and fall off. So you want to keep it in long enough so that you're not having an easy break right here. There really isn't a huge rule of thumb, but usually you want to keep it in as far as the bow tie is wide. That's a pretty decent thing. So in actual function of this is probably a little closer to the edge. So if this was just a small, thin hairline crack, that wouldn't be a huge issue. But if this was an opening crack and I would have worries about it, I'd probably actually move the bow tie in back to here so that it had more strength in this spot here. So that's, again, something else you have to play by ear, but don't keep it too close to the edge. And if you're talking about a bowl, you're going to be running into some problems there because the bowl, depending on how close you are to the rim of the bowl, you may actually create a new weak spot because it will want to crack from this corner here out along the grain and just break off a piece. So in the case of a bowl, I usually would like to say stabilize it with epoxy. That makes things far better. Any question while I'm setting this up?
Sure. Mike Evans asked, should the stock be clamped across the width to pull the crack together when installing the bow tie?
Depends on the board. So what he's saying is should I clamp it together to close up the crack and then put it in, and then let the pressure off? Or do I leave the pressure off and then put the bow tie on? It depends on how you want it. If you want that crack to close up and disappear, then clamp it up and put it in there. You're just going to be loading it with pressure ahead of time, and for the first while, there's going to be a lot of pressure on that bow tie. So you're going to need to make sure that the bow tie is in deep enough, far enough away from the edge so it can actually be structurally sound. And so, again, depending upon the board, if you're talking like a 3/4 inch board, you're probably going to want a bow tie that goes at least a 1/2 inch deep into the board. I don't like having bow ties going all the way through the board. It just creates more of a weak spot. Whereas if they go 3/4 or 2/3 of the way through the board, then you still have the strength of the fibers underneath it, and there's less chance of something breaking out underneath it. Just a personal preference. Some people really like to have the bow ties go all the way through the board. I don't.
Is it still quiet bee power?
So let's actually do some of this. Now, what I want to do here is the initial idea, the initial thought that most people are going to have is let's actually go ahead and cut this thing right at the line. So I'd put the knife right into the line here. But the problem with that is that this wedge is going to push it away from the line. And you're going to automatically create gaps around the outside. Where's my mallet? Here's my mallet. So what I want to do, mind the gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move in about a 1/16 inch or so inside the line. And I'm just going to run around and outline this inside the line. Now I'm going to do the cross grain cuts with this first, because if I put it in the long grain cut like this, where I'll be running with the cut, then I run into issues where I can actually turn it into a wedge and split the wood out. So I'm just going to take this tape out. Not enough sawdust on it to hold it in place. Most of the time there ends up getting a bunch of sawdust on there and it's no longer sticky. So I'm going to outline this.
Beep a cheap. Thank you.
What's that?
So you're saying my voice is quiet, but I don't know if my mic is.
You were turned away from it probably.
I don't know. I hear that you have had to use the tube many times. I'm not what's the word, jealous of anyone who has to jump on it at 5 p.m.
Then I'm going to come in here, bevel down. And yes, I'm going to use the chisel, bevel down, and I'm going to remove the waste. And so I mean, I could come in here with the bit and brace. Let me grab my smaller one. There it is. And with the bit and brace, munch through a decent amount of material pretty quickly. And if I'm working with big bow ties, the bit and brace is the way to go. But in this case, with this wood, there really isn't a huge issue with that. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I've taken out the waste. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to outline it again. I'm going to go in the same spot, still staying about an 1/8 to a 1/16 of an inch away. And chop down all the way around. Any questions while I'm doing this?
Yes. Let's see. Cheatwood Creations asked, when you're marking the bow tie, are you keeping the back of the marking knife flat against the bow tie, or are you undercutting a bit?
I am keeping the flat edge of the marking knife flat against the bow tie, but I'm only making a nick of a cut. I'm only cutting through the tape and making a slight mark into the wood. I think that's one of the problems that some people have. So they try to make too deep of a cut with a marking knife, and if you make too deep of a cut, you're actually just creating a wedge, which gives you an inaccurate line. So I just have a very, very fine line on here that you probably can't even see with the camera, but in person I can. So there, now we've outlined it again. Now it's coming to the chisel.
So
let's remove more material.
are you just eyeballing at this point how deep?
Yeah, I'm not going to be going down deep enough. Usually what I'll do is grab a scrap and I'll set it down in there, and that'll let me know how close I am. But in this case, I'm going to stop it so that when I put this in there, it's actually going to be slightly above the height. It's going to be slightly proud. Now what I can do is I can come in with a router plane. Ooh, actually, let me see if I have my mini one here. I do have it. Nice. I've never actually used this, and I haven't seen... Oh, no, that's as dull as can be. Okay, I got this mini one I need to clean up one of these days, which is great for little things like this. But it's not sharp. And this is a pretty crummy cutter. But I picked it up for like $5, so you can't complain.
Is that a hand router, or what was it?
Router plane.
Okay.
And I think I'm just going to do it down to this depth here. So, a lot of people really worry about the bottom of this being perfectly flat and perfectly smooth. You don't have to worry about that too much, but even if you have just like a dowel running through a board, you can set it with this, and you can check and just see where's the high spot, where's the low spot, and try and bring everything in close to where it should be. I'm not going to get really picky. You know, a router plane makes that really nice and easy to come in and clean it out. But in this case, I'm just going to get it close like that. So now I've got this set up around here, and I'm inside of the line by about an 1/8 or a 1/16 of an inch. Now I want to come back in with my chisel, and I want to get closer. So I want to actually put it in about halfway back. So now I'm less than a 1/16 inch away from the line. I'm just going to push this in all the way around and get really, really close to that line. All the way around. I'm going to take my time here because I don't want to touch that line until the absolute last possible moment. Any questions while I'm going around?
Yes. Star Trek fan fiction.
Like the name?
Oh yeah, I knew you would. For longer cracks that only reaches on one end of the board, is it necessary to put one on the very end to keep the crack from going any further across the board?
No. I'm guessing where you're talking where the crack actually comes together. There really isn't a huge issue. You don't need one there because it's the leverage thing. It's not like plexiglass where you're creating a hole to stop it from spreading. There is no stress point in that crack per se. Woohoo! This is just so much fun. Like a good sharp chisel.
So I have another
just
question.
push it down in. What's that?
So Carbonite Morgan asked, I'm restoring a brace. Should I wax or oil it when I'm done?
Yes and yes. I like using wax and oil together. Actually, I use a paste wax that I've made, which is wax and oil together. I just find that to be a really nice, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, you're talking about like for lubrication, probably. I use that for like rust protection. But for lubrication, I use like a 3-in-1 oil. So nothing particular. So now I'm about as close to this line. Slide my stool over here. Now I'm about as close to this line as I can get. So I'm going to set this right into that line. And I'm going to make sure that the chisel is vertical. And I'm just going to push it down in. And then move over to the next one. Make sure that the line is vertical. Push it in. And I'm just taking off a fuzz here, whatever was left over from that. And I want to make sure I get right up into that line all the way along and then clean it off. And I'm just eyeballing vertical. Once you've done it a couple times, your eyeball will give you dead on vertical. It's not something that you have to worry about and set up a gauge.
So carbonite Gamur, I can't talk to me. That guy. Clarify. Gamorian, there we go. For rust.
Yeah, for rust, oil and paste wax. Soak the oil, let the oil soak into the steel because cast parts are porous. And then cover it over with a paste wax, and that will help seal it all in so that the oxygen can't get to the steel and rust it. Almost there. Anything else?
Let's see. S. Richie asked, so I have a massive maple burl and I have no idea what to do with it, and I don't have a lathe. Would anyone have recommendations as what to do with it?
Do anything you want with it.
You're helpful.
A stabilized burl can actually do some really decent work. I mean, it's usually not big enough to make furniture pieces out of, but great accent pieces or bow ties. Well, I don't know, bow ties wouldn't be great because it's not a straight grain piece. Sorry, out of the camera angle. I was making sure I get my hand out of there. And we're almost there. When you get back into these corners, the best thing and easiest thing to do is come in with a marking knife and just pick everything out. It allows you to cut all the way down in. Here, let's see if I can do it without getting in the camera's angle. And then I can use the tip of this to pick out the junk all the way down in there. And make sure that you have everything cleaned out. You don't want anything trapped up against the edges. Otherwise, you start running into issues. And there. A little more in here. There. Now, this isn't a perfectly flat finish, and so normally what I do is I pour in some glue and I let that fill the gaps in there, just like a simple tight bond 2. Actually does have a good bit of gap filling strength, and you don't really need a lot because the face grain here, glue, is just kind of keeping this from sliding around. It's not actually providing strength to the joint itself. And so that's not something we're worrying about. And then on the outside you have in grain to edge grain, and so the glue around the outside really has absolutely no strength at all. So the keys are designed to be there and not have anything at all. They're a glueless joint. So we can set this in here, and so what I want to do is I want to start with one corner. I'm going to kind of tuck that corner in a little bit, and then I'm going to go around with a wooden piece on here. I'm going to tap it. And you'll see here it's not sliding in, and here it's sliding in easily. That lets me know this corner is good. Don't ever touch that corner. And I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to judge this corner. In this case, actually, I think, see, I've got a really solid sound there. It lets me know that I'm actually a really tight connection right here. Whereas on this side, there's a more hollow sound that lets me know I'm sliding and don't worry about it. Now, this is one of the other problems that a lot of people get into is they'll get it halfway in there, they want to pull it back out. Well, if you're not careful when you're pulling it out, you're going to strip off the fibers on either side. So you want to slowly just wiggle it and make sure you don't peel anything back up. Now, because I knew it was tight there, I'm actually going to come into this and just see, yeah, there's some extra junk down in there that was catching on. And so I'm going to undercut this a little bit. I know that line is where I need to be, but I need to undercut it just a little bit so that it's not catching on it. And now we can try this again. One of the biggest problems that people have is they go back and they make it bigger and bigger trying to make it fit. If your line was cut perfectly, if you know that the mark you made with your marking knife when you went around it was nice, then don't ever touch that line. Don't make the hole any bigger. The problems are down inside the hole, not the outside rim. So now we have this in place, and there comes the moment of truth where it's ready to go. I haven't pounded it down in there because once you pound it down in, you can't get it out. So I'm going to start by just tapping a little bit until I know it's going in nice and evenly. And then a couple good. And there we go. That's in there. Now we can plant it off flush, and we got ourselves a bow tie. So any questions while I'm getting that set?
Let's see. Jack Flash had an interesting question. If you were a butterfly, which type of wood would you prefer to be inserted into?
White oak.
Of course. And then you answer this question as to if you get it stuck, what do you do?
If you get it stuck in there, it's in there. Because that's, once you start pounding it down in, it's in. The two choices you have are, number one, continue to pound it in and hope for the best, or number two, run some screws into it and pull it out and then make a bigger bow tie that covers the gap. And I've had a couple times where the bow tie hasn't been exactly what I want to do, and then I go back to the drawing board and I make a bigger bow tie to cover the whole thing. And it's much easier to cut the second bow tie because, it's bigger, and most of the cut has already been filled out.
Will do, Alan.
Okay.
Will do. All the pubs.
Here, I'm going to switch back over to this one because this is the fun part where the smoothness comes out on this.
Butterfly needs a butterfly.
Move that back.
Would you call that a metamorphosis?
Come on, work with me. There we go. Oh, there we go. Back in focus. And because I'm going cross-grained here, I want to be very careful not to cut into the side. I'm only going to go until I get close. But I love these curls when they come out, because if you unroll them and you're careful, see, that one broke. But you can see the outline of the butterfly underneath. So in this case, now I'm cutting into the edge here, and I gave myself a plane track. And so one of the problems that people are going to have is that they then cut this way, and then they cut this way, and then they cut this way, and you're always leaving plane tracks. And the best answer to that is get a card scraper, because the card scraper you can go cross grain, and you can clean up the whole thing.
Were you just using? Adam Toss wants to know.
Or you can do what my dad would do and just grab an orbital sander and clean it up. And there you go.
So
that is very happy.
Listen to me.
Sorry, what?
Adam Toth wants to know what plane you just used to make it flush.
This is my go-to smoothing plane. It is a Veritas custom plane, and this is my. If I could have any plane in the world for functional use, it would be a Veritas custom plane. You get to choose the handle style, and they have several different handle styles. You get to choose your knob style. You get to choose your type of steel. You get to choose the angle of the cut. It has an adjustable mouth, so you can slide it in and out. It has sets on either side to keep the iron in place from shifting side to side. It has a Norris adjuster for very, very fine adjustments. This is really, this is my favorite plane. I have it set up right now for really nice, fine, smooth shavings. And I am really happy with how this came out. Let me see if I can zoom in here and show you. All right, well, here, let's do it this way.
So there was
move the board over.
Question earlier about what you're using on the bottom, and I'm assuming it's wood. And you said it was a Philippine mahogany.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the name of it is. It's Filipino mahogany. It's commonly used in boat building because it's fairly water resistant. But it's a relatively soft, really nice for carving. as mahogany is, and it's fairly similar color and texture to mahogany, though it tends to be a little softer than sapele or regular mahogany. So let me actually do this. I'm going to show you a close-up of this and give you the chance to see how poor of a cut that actually is. So I did it live, so it's not perfect. I didn't get to spend a lot of time really taking care of it. I got a fairly tight line all the way around. There's a little bit of gap here in the corner right here, and that is because I was using this chisel that has this flat edge right here, and that flat edge, when I drove it down in there, created a bit of a bump out right here in the corner. Normally I use my dovetail chisel, which has this endless corner, so I can get right down in there and clean that out. But I didn't think about it, and all I was using was the bench chisel. But that being said, I stayed away from these corners just a hair away, and then I would come in with a marking knife and clean out. And the other 3 corners are actually pretty nice and sharp. Actually, there really isn't much of a gap in here other than this. It's a fairly happy bow tie. And I like actually cutting them like this so that it's in a regular shape. There's nothing about this is right. This line is not parallel to this line. These 2 lines are not parallel. These 2 lines are not parallel. It looks organic and has that handmade feel that I like. But I am weird, and not everyone likes that organic feel. What other questions we got?
Let's see. Emmett Huncannon wanted to know, do you not have to glue it?
Do I not have to glue it?
The bow tie.
No, you don't have to glue a bow tie. Bow ties are a mechanically functioning joint. In other words, they hold themselves in. They're a dovetail that connects together. You can make, like the bed I'm making is going to be designed so if I wanted to, I wouldn't have to use glue in any of it, just because it has mechanically functioning joints at every spot. And the bow tie is one of those things. The only way that the only direction that this bow tie can go is out. And if it's a nice tight fit joint, it can't get out. And especially if the wood is wet at all. If it is slightly more moist than it will be, the wood will then contract around this whole thing and pinch it in place. And if it's well done, the friction of holding it in place will keep that from coming out. There's absolutely no way I can get this out. And the expansion and contraction of the wood this way is not enough force to move that out in 100 years. So it's not something you need glue on. Do I ever put glue on bow ties? Yeah, because I like gluing things. It just makes me feel better. It makes you feel like the joint is solid when you glue it. But do you need glue? No. And especially if you have an open crack running down this, if you glue it and you hammer it down in there, any of the squeeze out then goes into that crack. And then you have to try and get the glue out of there because you want to show off the crack. You want to see what's inside there, and that becomes a problem. And so sometimes putting the glue in there is actually more of a pain than it's worth. So yeah, you don't need glue unless you want it. So
did you talk about fixing the gap then just now? I was trying to get caught up on.
No, I didn't talk about fixing that gap. I mean, if I wanted to, the easiest way to do it is just a tiny dab of super glue and dust from one of the 2 woods, and it generally disappears, but I don't like doing that. I like to show those gaps. So for me, I mean, that gap that you would see there, let me put this back on. Where is it? It's this one here. I mean, you really have got to be looking for this thing to see it. It's right here. Just a little bubble out right there. I mean, you got to get your nose down on it to see that type of thing. So I don't worry about that type. If I had like a gap running all the way along one side, I still wouldn't fill it. Just because I like showing off those imperfections. I like being able to see them and to learn from it. It just makes it feel more real than trying to hide it. And plus, when you do a glue and sawdust fill, it generally looks okay, but if you use a boiled linseed oil finish on it, it makes it stand out and it looks horrible. So that's one of the reasons why I don't do the glue and fill method. I just don't like it as much. So, personal preference.
Wonderful.
The way I end most of my questions.
Sorry. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's any more related to Adam asks, how did you make the bottom flat under the bow tie piece? Chisel or router? He must have not.
Yeah, I just used the chisel, bevel down, and cleaned it out. The bottom doesn't have to be perfectly flat, unless you are intending on the glue being what holds it together. The bottom doesn't have to be perfectly flat. And so in this case, normally I would grab my router and I would set it up and I'd take the time and I would flatten it out, just because a flat bottom feels good to the sole. But I didn't have the time, and my little one, which I should have thought of ahead of time, I don't have that sharpened and ready to go. But yeah, you don't need it to be perfectly flat. Just feels good.
All right, so let's see. Star Trek fan fiction asks, do you ever put a bow tie across gaps?
Yeah, I've done that for a few things where I want to actually accentuate and show it off. Like in live edge furniture, that's pretty common, where you might have like an inch wide gap and you have a big bow tie that spans across it. It's a great way of showing things off. That's one of the times you want to be careful about gluing it down, because when you pound it down in, then the glue will squeeze out into the crack and it can be hard to pull out of there and keep it clean. But yeah.
Let's see. Choo Choo Debut. Wood by Wright. What are your favorite types of trade shows? There are all types in my area, but I'm hesitant to apply for one that demands a $1,000 booth.
Oh, you're talking about like sales. I don't do those. I don't sell what I make. I used to do that years ago, and yeah, I'm not the person to ask for that. Person to contact is Worth the Effort, and he's usually on here. I don't think I've seen him tonight.
I don't think he's here tonight.
But you look him up on YouTube, Worth the Effort. He has actually several videos on setting up booths and what you look for and things to show out and things to make. A lot of good information on that there, so definitely take a look at his channel.
Mike asked if there are any cool goodies from the UK. We got our kids Kinder chocolate. You can't get the real stuff here. And about like 10 pounds, because all we did was eat. It was good food.
Actually, I lost weight on the trip.
Well, we probably did too, because we walked everywhere.
I ate less than I normally do. But most of my souvenirs are pictures and videos.
Yes.
Had a lot of fun taking pictures there.
Personal photographer.
The coolest thing about the trip for me was seeing the history and the design of buildings and furniture, and just seeing a different culture and the different ways that things are done. A lot of great inspiration that way, and just seeing how the world comes together.
We really wanted to just go in somebody's house and look around. We were in this one neighborhood, and it was like, oh, I just want to go in and see. That's what we like to do.
Yes, the sinks with two faucets, and you're like, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold.
Having to pay to use a toilet, though.
Yeah, that was a weird one.
Have to say it's a good thing that I only had to do it a couple times. Anyways, thankfully, most museums are smart and realize that the American tourists are used to lots of bathrooms everywhere. But anyways, I digress. Let's see. ZZ, I don't know if it's ZZ Wright or just ZZ. Any tips on what to look for when buying my first hand plane off eBay?
If you're buying an antique hand plane, the best thing to do is to buy one and try to set it up and learn from your mistake. That's the way I learned. I bought a half dozen junk hand planes before I found one that was right. Other than that, there's not anything I can tell you to be careful of. I mean, I have a bunch of videos on what to look for in a hand plane, but until you know hand planes, and until you know the parts, and until you know what are commonly broken, it's really hard to look at something and say, yeah, that's a good one. It's one of those things that you've got to learn, and the easiest way to learn is by experience, but sometimes that's the expensive way. Yeah. So find a friend, or get on the hand tool, the unplugged woodworkers on YouTube. Wow. Unplugged woodworkers on Facebook, and put a image up there and say, hey, I'm looking at buying this plane. Is it any good? And you'll get 1,000 comments of yes, no, yes, no. and you'll get some good ideas on there. So that's probably the best way is get some advice from someone who knows, and you'll learn pretty well there. But it's one of those things that it's very good to buy bad planes and learn from it, because you learn things far better that way. At least I do. I'm a stubborn person, so.
No, you're just a slow learner. Anyways, Mike Evans asked, "Is that rust spots on the plane?"
Rust spots on the plane. No, I've got some wax on the side of this thing.
Wax on, wax on.
Or I guess it's like a stickum, a little bit of glue. That, and I don't worry about rust that much down here because I'm in an air-conditioned basement, so rust is not a huge issue. And if I do get a little bit of rust on something, oh well. It's not something I worry about. I don't keep my tools in absolute pristine, perfect condition. I use them regularly, and so that usually keeps the rust off.
You ready for a couple more?
Yeah. Yeah, we got plenty of time.
Okay.
We're doing good.
Mm-hmm. S. Richie asks, "So what do you do for fun outside of woodworking?"
Well, if you look behind my wife, you'll see a whole bunch of numbers on the wall. Those are my race bibs. And so I do a lot of ultra running. So I run races that are longer than a marathon. And that is my other big hobby.
No, your hobby's trying to convince your wife to do it with you.
That too. Usually my hobby is having hobbies. And so there's a reason why I have 9 different YouTube channels and have a lot of fun with that. So I like learning things. I like experiencing new things. And so whatever I do, I try and learn something new, and I like getting new hobbies. Just why I married my wife. She always keeps things interesting. There's always something new to learn around her.
Trying to see where you're going to go with that one. Although I was kind of disappointed you didn't do a Doctor Who reference when you started the video. Bowties are cool.
Wore a fez.
Yeah. Anyways, I digress. Douglas Dyer asked, "What did your family do here in Decatur?"
My grandfather was the head of deputations at Baptist World Missions, which is based out of Decatur, Alabama. And so he lived there for, 12, 13 years or so before he passed away. And so I lived down there for a few months in between when my father was between churches. So that was an interesting time in my life.
Sorry.
What?
The comment.
Oh.
Did you just refer to your wife as a hobby?
Yes.
And then next week's bill, the doghouse and how to make it livable.
How to install air conditioning on a doghouse.
If I haven't learned anything in 13 years, 17 years a day. We have been together half of my life.
Our wedding anniversary is yesterday, so.
And how did we celebrate? He went and tried to move a log.
I attempted to pull a log out of a river. Didn't quite get it out.
It's a good thing we were just in England, otherwise. Well, then we had a kids' concert, too. It was fine.
What's the next one?
Let's see.
Got enough time for 2 or 3 more?
R. Tawny asked, "Were you able to get the English oak?"
Yes, actually, I got, let me see if I can grab those here. 1, 2. Yes, I got these from Gary Wall and Stourbridge, UK. Stourbridge. These are actually out of beams of English oak, and they have all of the nail holes in them from the flooring. And so he actually gave me some of the old cut nails that were pulled out of these. So I've got a few ideas of what I want to do with this. I thought about actually turning one of them in, carving it into a London phone booth. But then thought, there's probably better ways to use English oak. So I will be seeing about that. I did get a little bit of English oak. So thank you, Gary. Those are kind of cool.
And we're very grateful for the airline not making us try to unpack our 21 kilogram suitcase. 'Cause it was
Oh yeah,
over
sure.
the
1
20
kilogram over.
Anyways, let's see. La, 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 la. Oh, is there going to be a giveaway tonight? That's what Moon Wolf said.
No, not right now. I've got to rethink what I'm doing with those, so I'm sorry. Let's see, there's one that was just on there.
Any suggestions for woodworkers visiting the UK?
Oh yeah, definitely go to, if you're going to be in London, go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, the V&A. And they have a furniture gallery that is really cool. And it's not, most furniture galleries are set up by age. And so they take you through furniture through the ages, which is kind of cool. But this one actually took it through construction methods. And so they had a whole selection of marquetry furniture. And they had a whole selection of arts and crafts furniture. And they had a whole section of bent lamination furniture. And so they went through all of these different methods of construction as opposed to doing things. And so you might have, the marquetry, you'd have things from, 1,000 years ago until just yesterday. And they had several pieces in there that were contemporary, things that were recently built and put in there. It was a really kind of an interesting display. They had several pieces in the middle where you could walk all the way around and get down on your hands and knees and look underneath them. And they had several where they had the piece beside, and then beside that they had an exploded view with all the pieces and showing all the joinery and how they connect together. It was a fascinating build and one of the best furniture exhibits I've seen. So that's definitely worth it. But yeah, wherever you go in England, there's just a lot of old joinery, old construction, and things that just provide an inspiration that you don't always get around here. Because around here, an old building is 50 years old, so they're a little different. What else we got?
A pen to go asked, James, are you ever going to get into Japanese hand planes?
One of these days I want to get into Japanese woodworking. I want to actually do Japanese style woodworking with a bench on the floor and actually go through learning the body mechanics in that way. I don't like bringing pull tools into a Western style bench. There's a lot of people who like that. I don't. I find them to be less efficient, and I would rather use that in the manner that they were designed for, in the manner that they were commonly used. But that is down the road a long ways. I don't have a huge desire to do it, and so it's probably down the road even longer than that. So yeah, one of these days maybe.
You gotta finish the bed.
Yeah, the bed needs to get done. What else? One more? Yeah.
See, ZZ, right. I put on around 5 coats of Danish oil on a tabletop and it feels sticky now. It's been sitting for about a week and it still has some sticky feel to it. Any recommendations?
With Danish oil, okay, that depends. Danish oil is a very broad term that can refer to many, many different things. It's usually a BLO plus something else. And so one of the big problems with that is putting it on too thick. And so if you put on the first coat and it absorbs into the wood but doesn't harden, and then you put on another coat right over top of it, then you're not allowing the coat underneath to cure, and you're just kind of sealing it up, and then you end up building up coats that have not sealed well. And so, yeah, that's one of the more common problems. Other problems could be humidity in the area, or the oil itself is bad. There's other things that could go wrong, but usually at that point, if it hasn't hardened in a week, the best thing is actually to scrub it off and put something new on there. But that's a bit drastic. So yeah, not a great place to be. But most of the time it comes from putting it on too thick too fast, because it may feel dry to the touch, but the coat underneath is still curing because it's down into the wood. So something to keep in mind. Cool. Anything else? Okay. then I think we're going to call it. So if you have any ideas that you want me to do for next week, let me know. I'm always open to those, and I haven't quite figured out what I want to do yet. I'm thinking about some joinery, but I'm also thinking about maybe some basic techniques. I've thought about doing a how to cut straight, or how to follow a line with a saw, and going through a few things on that. So if that's something you want to see, let me know. So I think that is about it for tonight. If you want to see me, June 9th, we're going to be in Chicago at the open house for DMF Toolworks. And then the next week, June 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th, I'm going to be down in Peoria at the Midwest Tool Collectors Meet. Both of those have links down below in the description. So I think that's about it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Find the button, find the button. Where's the button? Where's the button? Find the button, find the button. Click the button, click the button.
No, you had to have 3 screens.
I'm still waiting.